Hi, I'm Hummy, and today we're going to be talking about the basics of using the gradient tool. The gradient tool can be very intimidating when you first open it up, and until you learn what all the little options inside of it do. The gradient can be used in many ways. We're not going to go over those. We're just going to learn about the basics of the tool, and then in other tutorials, maybe for technique challenges, we will show various methods that you can use the gradient tool. The gradient tool can be applied on an existing image, or it can be applied to a layers mask, which would be this button right here. And it can be put on a new layer. There are just so many things that you can do with a gradient. Here in the toolbar is what the gradient tool looks like. So you would click on it to make it the active tool. Then you're going to see here is a down arrow called a flyout arrow. And let's get back to my default ones for this tutorial. And you're going to see these pop up. You can grab the corner of this box and resize it into any manner you like. You click the flyout arrow and you're going to see here the various sizes that you can make the thumbnails. I believe the default is this small thumbnail, but of course this large thumbnail is going to be much easier to see. I'm going to go ahead and click out here on my desktop to make that go away for right now. And want to show you, you can hear papers ruffling. I'm trying to follow the written tutorial that you can download on the index pages on the website. Hopefully I can do this going back and forth. I don't want to, there's so much to include in this tutorial, I don't want to forget anything. And so here is what I'm calling the gradient thumbnail, and if you double click on it, it's going to bring up the gradient editor, and you can see here are those same gradients that we saw previously. The first two gradients here utilize the foreground and the background color. You see this one will be a gradient that goes from the foreground to the background, and this one will be from the foreground to transparent. And if you look down here, my foreground color is red and my background color is blue, and that's why this icon is blue and red. If I change these colors, this icon is going to change also. Another one used often is this black to white. If you click the More arrow again, down here are other libraries of colors. For instance, this one is metals, and so if you want to fill something to make it look like a metal, you might choose one of these gradients. To choose a gradient, you just click on them. And so you can see this gradient here might make a really nice metal. If you just draw a circle and fill it with this gradient, just go ahead, try it, see what happens. And so you can choose any number of other gradients that come default with your program just by going into this area. I'm going to go back to the default. And I'm turning the page of my paper. Okay, let's look next at the options on the toolbar. Up here is the toolbar for the the gradient. We already talked about the thumbnail, and let me just show you. If you would click on a different one, see this one is violet to orange, then your thumbnail now is going to change to violet to orange. I don't really know why this button is here, but if you click on it, it brings up the editor. So I tend to just double click right on the thumbnail. They both do the same thing. Next on the toolbar are various patterns, and so we have this violet to orange. Let's go back in and choose one with 3 colors so that you can see. This is blue, red, yellow, so that you can see when I apply this what it does. I'm going to go ahead and create a selection because I'm going to be showing you what these gradients do within this selection. The first pattern is the default pattern. It's called the linear gradient, and it will put the gradient in a straight line, and so this is the one that's most commonly used. So if I start here on this side, click down with my mouse and just drag somewhere to the other side, that gradient is going to be more like a rainbow, just slowly merging from one of the colors to the next colors depending on the settings in the gradient. I'm going to hit my undo button. This next one is called the Radial Gradient, and it makes more like a sunburst of the gradient, you know, taking one of the colors and moving from the center outward. In order to apply this gradient, you need to click in the center and drag to one edge. And there you can see how that one works. Now the next one is an angle, and it puts a counterclockwise swirl from wherever you first click. And so if I click here and pull down to here, you can see from where I first clicked it put a counterclockwise swirl. See, from it starts when the blue, the red, and then into the yellow. If I put it in a different direction from a different starting point, you can see how that is applied. The next one is a reflective gradient, and I need to turn my written tutorial paper over. This one creates a mirror image from the center, and so in order to make this one work effectively, you also need to drag from the center out. And you can see now that there's a mirror image on each side. It goes blue, pink, red, yellow this way, and blue, pink, red, yellow that way. The last one is called a diamond, and in order to make the diamond, you also have to click from the center. So there are 3 of them that require you to click from the center, and it makes a diamond. Of course, you can play. Watch what happens when I click it all the way across the page. We get half a diamond. And so you can play with these. You know, playing is so much fun. In order to you know, analyze and think about what each of them would do if you click in different spots than you would normally click. Okay, we're going to get rid of my selection. Let's go on, on the toolbar. The next section is the mode, and this makes available to you all the various blending modes as you would find them over here. This layer is locked, can't see them, as you would find them over here. And we're just going to let you play with them to figure out how they affect your gradients, as well as the opacity. This allows the gradient to show through more. Very useful maybe if you're applying that gradient directly to the photo layer itself. If you're applying it to a new layer above a photo layer, you could just utilize this opacity instead. So The next one is reverse. Now this one is a really handy option on the toolbar. I want you to observe the thumbnail over here, and it goes from blue to yellow. And when I click reverse, it's now going to go from yellow to blue. And so you can reverse it the way that it is applied to your page. The dither box is almost always checked. It keeps the transition of the blending smooth. You can play with it and take it off and test it, and put it back on and test it to see how it varies it, as well as, and you can't really see this here, I'll close my box, you still can't see it, but this is transparency. It's because I got my screen small for the purpose of recording. But this one is transparency, and this allows the gradients to have the transparency within them. And for instance, this one goes from the foreground color to transparent, and so it allows that gradient to work. Let's talk more about the gradient editor now. You can create a custom gradient by either editing, I can never say that word, y'all are going to be laughing at me again, by changing the existing gradients in the preset. They are the default ones that come with Photoshop Elements, or you can create a brand new one. We're going to go ahead and do that. If I select this red, blue, and yellow and click New, you're going to see another red, blue, and yellow one shows up here at the end of the thumbnail views. And so I'm going to click on that one to make sure that's the active one. The next box down here is the gradient type, and most often the solid is used, and that's what most of the gradients are, but you can also choose a noise. The noise is not similar to the noise that's found up here in the filter drop down menu, where it adds little speckled, I don't know how to describe how that filter works, but it doesn't work similar to that. You can see already what it's done to this gradient, in that it puts the colors randomly across in a spectrum. You can go up to the library and you're going to see noise samples. I made changes. Do I want to replace them? No. And so we can click on these, and here are some samples that they have, so you can kind of get an idea of what a noise gradient might do. I'm going to go back to my default. Let's go ahead and make that new one again for us to play with. The next setting is smoothness. Now smoothness controls how even the transition appears across the colors, and so this here is called the gradient bar, and I want you to watch the gradient bar as I move the smoothness down. And you can see, especially in here, that the transition between this purple and the blue is not as smooth. It's a little rougher. This might be more evident on, let's try this one. Which one would it be more evident on? Well, I'm not finding it. I'm not going to play with it. It's kind of hard to see by the thumbnails how it works. I had one that was working really well the other day that I could tell the difference. There, you can see this now. There's a hard line coming in right here, and if I bring the smoothness back up, you can see that hard line went away. Did you see that? I'm going to do it again. There, that one kind of was a good example. So let me turn the page in my tutorial again. The gradient bar is really intimidating at first sight until you learn what all these tools are in it. It's really not as difficult as it seems. These here are called stops. In this tutorial, or in this gradient, we have 5 stops. The stops on the bottom are called color stops, and the stops on the top are called opacity stops, or opacity, however, tomato. And so if you click on one of them, I'm going to click on this red one in the middle, you'll and watch the little triangle part at the top is going to turn black. So that's what the little triangle part on each of them represents, is that it is the active one. And so you can see now that when I click on this one, that triangle is black and this triangle is no longer. And so we're going to go on now. You can grab the color stops and slide them from right to left. Any one of them you can slide. Now if I go as in my tutorial, I state, and I slide this one 3/4 of the way over, you can see that the gradient is going to be 3/4 of black and only 1/4 of white. And so if you would maybe picture this as your entire page, and if you put your cursor down on one side and moved it to the other, you're going to see this much black across the page before you start seeing that much white. When you begin to move these sliders, or when you activate one of them, these areas become non-grade. You can see this opacity one, and these up here are grayed out. I can manually set these. That's 3/4 exactly at 75%. If you get to be where you're adding a lot of stops, and you really want your gradient to be uniform going across your page, you may want to observe the location to make sure that they are exactly the same amount of distance apart. Now when you click on a stop, I want you to watch in between these 2 stops here, and in between these 2 stops here, the diamonds are going to appear. And there they are. This diamond is the midpoint between the 2 colors, but this midpoint doesn't have to be at exactly 50%. I can grab this, and now you see it turns black, and this is not black any longer, indicating that this is now the active thing I'm working with. And you can see that the location is also available now. And if I move this slider closer to the red, you can see now that the midway point between the yellow and the red is here, and so I'm going to get more yellow than I am red. Now if I click down on this stop again, I can go over here and get this midway point and move it too. So now because I've moved both midpoints really close to this red, I'm going to have very small transition of red in this gradient. To add a new stop is so simple. It's all you need to do is double click right here, or click once in any area underneath where the color stops go. Now when you click on a color stop, this button is no longer grayed out, and so if you want to delete that button, just hit the delete and it goes away. To change a color on one of these stops, so now I've got a huge area of red here, because what it does is when you create a new stop, it creates one of your previously active stop. And so if I wanted another yellow stop, I could make this yellow stop active and click here, and it will insert one there. So when you're making new stops, it by default makes one from the currently active stop. But let's say you want to change the color of that stop. So I'm going to change the color of this one, so I'm going to make it the active one. And you can go down here, and if you double click on this, it brings up the color picker, and you could change the color that way. And you could see it immediately happen in the gradient bar. You can also choose the foreground color, which would be whatever color you have here, the background color here, or user color, which would be the color that you just chose in the color picker. So if I choose the foreground color, you can see it inserted this red. The background color inserts this blue, and the user color, well, I'm not sure what the user color is. I thought it was going to go back to the green, but obviously it didn't. And so another way that you can get the colors, I'm going to make this yellow one the active one so I can change the color of it. If you hover right here over the bar, you're going to see it turns to an eyedropper tool, and I'm going to go over here and get this green, and now it's in this stop here. And so if you want to get the exact color from somewhere else in your gradient, you can use the eyedropper tool. Now the opacity stops work the same way as these down here in many of the ways. They turn black, the points do, the triangle points do when you click on them. You can slide them, and the location is also available, and you can also delete them, but you can add a new one. You have to have at least two of them there, one in each corner. But you can see that I have one here, and the delete shows up, so I can now delete that one. And here is the one difference between the opacity and the color, is that these just change the opacity of the layout. Right now the opacity is at 100%, meaning that all of these colors are going to be at full opacity. But if I move this slider, and let me point out before I do that, that's why this color in this opacity stop is black. But if I move this slider, you can see the opacity of that black is now turning to gray, and you can see how that changes the gradient. Now, just as the color stops do, the opacity stops have these midway points, so I can grab them and bring them in also. If I wanted to, I want to get 100% opacity and bring it in. Now you can see that this is 100% opacity, where it's not opaque at all, and gradually moves into a more opaque color. Kind of fun to play with. I'm going to stop here, as this video is already 24 minutes long and it takes a while for these to load, and then I'm going to continue on with a part 2 of this video, and part 2 is going to include just a quick overview of the the options under noise and how to save the gradients. And so I'll see you around on part 2. Welcome to part 2 of the gradient tutorial, and this section of the tutorial, following along with the written tutorial, starts with the noise gradients. And so I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change this solid gradient to noise, and you're going to see now that the options down here are totally different than the ones for the solid color. You don't see the stops that you see on the solid colored one. And let's go on and look at what the roughness is. The roughness controls the percentage of the range of colors, and so if we would move this all the way up to 100%, you can see it makes for quite an ugly gradient. And the colors are very rough, hence the roughness. And the opposite of rough is smooth. And so if you move this all the way down to the other end, you're going to see that the gradient is now very smooth. And something like this might be great to apply behind an extraction, or it makes me think of the board that the photographers put behind you when they're taking professional photos, to have a gradient applied and then a cloud filter over that. Anyway, my mind is wandering and thinking now. Let's go on to this next section. It's the color mode, and there are 2 color modes here, but I'm going to go ahead and close out of this, and I'm going to go into the color picker. Just to remind you to go to the hue, saturation, brightness tutorial, I think it is, and read that again, because that's going to help you understand how to use the noise filter. But here is the HSB, it stands for hue, saturation, and brightness color model, and here is the RGB, which is red, green, and blue color model. This color model says that all colors are made up of red, green, and blue in different proportions, and this one, the HSB, will change the hue, which is actually the color, which is actually this slider, and the saturation and the brightness separately. So let's go back into our gradient editor and make this a noise gradient again. And you can see here is the RGB color model that comes up as a default, and so you can move these sliders to change the colors in the gradient. Okay, my brain kind of had a fart there. But this right slider, well, I'm not going to explain what the sliders do till we get into the next color model, because it'll be a little bit more evident there. But you can see here, you can move them to any position to get the colors you need. It's easier to understand the colors in the HSB color model. Let's return these all to their default positions, and the white color stops, what they do is set the color on the outside of the you can see now I've moved it to blue, and here it is starting with blue on this side. Now watch what happens when we move the black one. It's going to be adding some it sets the range. I can't I'm at loss for words to explain how it does it, but it's going to be setting the range between the two colors, between the two stops. And so if I move this into green and this one into blue, everything is going to be in that range. Let's move the saturation up for both of them, and maybe the brightness up. But you just have to play with it, and know that you can move these across each other. You don't have to keep this white to the right side of the black. You can move these about. And a lot of this is just going to be playing, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time with it because I really haven't played with it enough to teach you what each of the things do. But let's go over here to the options box, and if you check restrict colors, it's going to keep them from getting too saturated. And if you click the add transparency, you can see it's now added some transparency to this gradient. And you don't have a whole lot of control as to how much transparency, but if you click on this randomizer, it changes that transparency. You just have to click on it until you see something that you like. You will remember when I first started, I said that the noise tutorial takes the colors and randomly throws them out, and so that's also what the transparency does. It's randomly throwing them out there. And once again, we could go up here to some sample of noise, and here's some that they have made, and I can play with these to change them too. And so this is a much more difficult gradient to work, and a lot of it is just playing with it until you get something that you say, hey, I think that's going to be cool. And you can save it if you need to save it once you arrive at something that you find is really cool, which is the next part of our tutorial, saving brushes. So I'm going to go back to the default library for this. And let's say we've made that new gradient, and we're just going to add some stops here and change it to some funky colors. There we go. Now we have a funky new gradient right here. And we want to, oh, I must have made changes to the other gradient. And let's say we want to save this gradient now. We can click new once we make changes to it, and it's going to put that here now as a new gradient. We want to save this gradient for future use. In order to do that, what you need to do is, let's see, you can change the name. My gradient is weird. And in order to save it, you're going to have to go and delete by right-clicking all of these other gradients. Because what gradients do when you save them, they save them as a library or an organization of similar gradients. And you have to go through and delete every single one of these, and this can be intimidating because, as you notice right now, I am actually deleting the default gradients out of here, and it's scary because you think that I might be permanently deleting those. Well, I'm not going to be permanently deleting those until I would save over them, and so don't be too scared about doing that. Now I have my brand new gradient here all by itself, and I can click save and go out to my desktop, and name it. It's named Untitled Gradient. Now it's saved to my desktop. And so the default is to save to your preset folder, but I just happened to not be in my preset folder from the last time I was playing with the gradients while I was writing this tutorial. Let me see. I have created, and let me see if I can quickly navigate to this through my computer. If you go to the C drive, Program Files, and then find LMNOP, not Photoshop yet, Adobe, then Photoshop Elements, and then go to presets. You're going to see the preset file for the gradients, and so you can go in there, and I have actually provided a download template for you, and you would rename that template to your name and gradients and put that in this preset folder. And then you would restart your Photoshop Elements, and when you restart it, you're going to be able to find that new library right here in this drop down menu. And so what you may want to do is make all of your gradients within this folder so that it's not freaking you out when you're in your other preset folders, because that can be really intimidating trying to delete those. And so you would create your gradient right here in this one, and then when you hit save, you would end up going, let's see, that same preset folder, which is probably going to, unless you've navigated away from it as I have, it's probably going to default right to this location. And so if I would just choose that gradient file and click save, it's going to ask me if I want to replace it, and I'm going to say yes. Now that file includes my new gradient plus the other gradients that are in there. So I've made this as a handy download for you, so that you can feel more comfortable in creating gradients, so that you won't fear that you mess up your defaults. Now I can go in and use the load button, and let's say you don't want to put a whole lot of gradients in here, because of course it's going to bog down your computer, and computer's going to take a long time to open up if you put too many gradients in this preset folder. And so you may want to keep them somewhere else on your computer, and load them when you need to use them. When you load gradients, you would just choose one of them and then click the load button, and you can see it's kind of scary once again. It looks like my default folder box now has way too many gradients in it, and because it adds it right to the presets that the library that you have as your active library. And so and you think that you've changed something permanently, but you haven't. Don't be worried. You're never going to change anything permanent to these preset things until you hit save, choose one of these, and save over it. So loading things in here and having them come to the bottom, don't panic. Everything is okay. You haven't messed up your defaults. To get back to the defaults that come with the computer or that are loaded into your presets, click on the More menu and do Reset Gradient, and you can see all those disappeared again, and this gradient is right back to where it's supposed to be, where it is saved in your presets. If this is intimidating for you, once again, go ahead and click on the one with your special name that I've shared with you how to install, and load things in here. So if you're messing something up, you're just messing up this file. You're not messing up anything, but if you feel like you're messing up things, you can work straight from this file, so it's less intimidating for you. Let me see, what else have I covered. We're getting down to the bottom of the tutorial, but you'll see here is a replace gradient. And now what this one does is basically it restores a backup of your gradient. I suggest in my tutorial that you manually go to your preset folder, and that special gradient file that you've made, that's where you're going to save all of the ones you make. Go in there, copy it, and paste it to wherever on your computer that you back up other files and photos and things on your computer. And that way all your hard work will be backed up, and if you accidentally mess up this file saving over it, what this replace does is restores the backup, and you would click on it and you would navigate to wherever you have that backup, choose it, and it's going to write over the active gradient. And so you need to be very careful if using this. If you were to be in your default gradients and you went in here and chose replace, and you replaced it with a gradient you downloaded from the internet, your default gradients are going to become that new gradient. And so you need to be really careful in using this. Of course, for me, I like to do things more manually, and if I messed up something and I had a backup, I'd probably just navigate straight through the folders and copy and replace and fix my mistake that way rather than using this tool. I hope that helps you understand more about the gradients and the gradient editor, but I want to show you real quickly a couple more things here. Under the new adjustment layer, you're going to see a choice for gradient and a choice for a gradient map. This first one works very similar to all the other tools that we have shared with you. Of course, the big difference is that you're going to now have a layer mask over here. You can double click on this and it brings up the editor. You can change it and bring it back down. Here's where you change the patterns. The cool feature with this one that's not in the other one is that you can change the angle of that gradient, and you can also change the scale and other things with the mask. So I'll be doing another tutorial on that, but you can see it is very similar to this gradient tool. The other adjustment is a gradient map, and this does not work like the other gradients, so it can be very confusing when you get it. This one replaces the colors in an image, and this one is mostly used when you're tweaking your photos. A popular one that is utilized is this black to white gradient on your photos, because if you go in here and you move these sliders, it's going to, I don't have a photo here, and I actually have this in another tutorial already, but it's going to really make that photo pop. And so this actually changes the colors in your photos, and so that's a whole nother tutorial, but I just wanted to mention it so if you see it you're not going to be confused by it. And so I hope you've learned a lot. This tutorial part 2 is over 20 minutes long, and so you have 45 minutes worth of or more worth of information to absorb, and I encourage you just to get out the open up your program and get out the tutorial and follow along step by step. If you want, you can watch this video, pause it, go to your Photoshop Elements and try to do what I just did, and go back and forth between the video and the editor, Photoshop Elements, or you can do the same by printing out this tutorial. But I hope you've learned a lot. There's a lot to learn with the gradient tool, and this only covers the basics, believe it or not, so we have so much more to learn, and I look forward to continuing to learn with you.